Welcome to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis, and today we're going to be talking about how to capture the psychological aspects of warfare in computer simulations, better known as video games. Today I'm joined by Luke Hughes, a man that probably has the most prestigious education that will ever be on my channel.
Too much schooling is what my scenario lead, who is a former U.S. Army sergeant, characterized me as too much schooling.
Yes. So a master's in neurophysiology and psychology from Oxford and a PhD of human-centered artificial intelligence from Yale, correct?
See, I rest my case for the sergeant. Steve Overton.
Yeah. Well, welcome and thank you for being with us today. And we're going to talk about your video game that you're coming out with from Green Tree Games called Burden of Command. So could you take a moment and tell us what Burden of Command is?
Absolutely. So this is where I become egregiously a small little indie trying to get attention. So please do put the brand logo up. At least I'm not shy about it. Or Burden of Command. What's the game about? One word: leadership. I come from a Silicon Valley background, for better or worse. So we learn elevator pitches. So when I was doing this project early on and thinking about what it'd be, I thought, what's the short thing I can reduce it to? And I can reduce it to one word, which is leadership. If I take it a little bit longer, I'd call it an emotionally authentic leadership role-playing game. So there was an article, Waypoint, that really aren't any leadership role-playing games out there. And I think maybe game has some unfortunate connotations. It is a game, but maybe think of it as a leadership experience. There's a game out there called This War of Mine, which is actually about civilians in war, sort of Sarajevo, and they had a lot of Sarajevo vets, but civilian vets advise it. And it's not a fun game, but it's been very popular, almost 1 million copies. So I don't know if Burden of Command will be fun, but we hope it will be engaging the way maybe Band of Brothers was. And Forbes, we were privileged enough to have an article on us recently, characterized as this game that is striving to be an interactive Band of Brothers. And I think that's a good characterization. One we'll probably not live up to, but we'll strive for.
Okay.
So a little bit, I want to say a few more things. First, I'm slightly intimidated talking to your audience because of all the officers and so forth and vets of other forms and enlisted, and I'm sure NCOs. We do have a lot of vets on our team. If you go to our Burden of Command website, notice how I cleverly segued. When you go to the team page, you can see we've got all levels. Well, we don't have generals, but we have all below in our advising. So I have exposure, but I'm always a little intimidated because you guys have walked the talk. You've been out there just like you, Franklin. That being said, it's also a very important honor to me. My father was a naval vet, World War II in the Pacific. My mother was a nurse. I have a son in active service Air Force, and my wife is actually a former Air Force officer. So you can see that this is something that matters to me personally. Okay. Now, having said that, let me get into what the game's about. So you can see right away we are an indie. We do not have the multi-million-dollar budget for the 3D stunning graphics. On the other hand, we are trying to be quite credible in the details. It is trying to be sensibly tactical. You can think of it kind of Band of Brothers XCOM. For those of you who are gamers, that means something. And it's turn-based, to be clear about that. And we focus very heavily on the leaders on the field. You may be able to see little portraits of people who get to know narratively. But at the same time, it's a role-playing game. This is an example situation, and that's actually a beach in Morocco where we follow the historic cotton balers with our 7th Regiment, U.S. 3rd Infantry Division. The cotton balers, some of you may not recognize them. They're the regiment that has served in the most wars, or all the wars of the U.S. since 1812. Okay. And we happen to have their historian, John McManus, who's also, in general, an eminent military historian advising us closely. So the things like I'm going to show you now, he reads over, he checks, are we in the spirit of things, so forth. And ideally, reasonably accurate. I don't claim to be a history book, but we do claim to be respectful and try to stick to the spirit of things. One of our design mottos is we try not, let's see if I can say it right, we try not to break history, and we may bend it, but we don't break it. Okay, so step up, step out. Crack of a rifle. One of your men goes down in a spray of blood. Sniper, someone shouts. Too late. And choose your own adventure. Get a choice. Let my men deal with it, or use myself as a decoy. So think about for a second what you might do there. I suspect most of you might pick one. maybe some of you too. Franklin, do you want me to put you on the point? Do you want to make a choice?
Well, I
There's
probably
not a right answer here,
use
Franklin.
myself as
Okay.
a decoy, but then again, I'd probably be the
Oh,
dead lieutenant
what
on
a
the
hero.
field.
Now, come on. We're talking the real guys in World War II, not, Hollywood. Well, actually, there were heroes in World War II or crazy people. One of the two. Pick your choice. So this is actually Lieutenant Colonel Heinz. I'm not sure I can say his name right, but he was cotton baler. And they had a sniper to deal with in Sicily, and he actually got out there and made himself the target to draw fire. So the bazooka team, and it worked, but could have gone very badly for him. It didn't happen to. He was pretty amazing. So you'll be put in these historic situations, and we have quite a few that we hope people will look at and they'll say, "Oh, please, Hollywood, not again." But we'll have a little icon in the bottom corner. Looks like a little book, and if you mouse over it, it'll actually tell you the history. So this, I think, whatever else we do innovatively, will be the first game to risk footnotes. So you can see already we're destined for failure. But seriously, you'll know it's down there. A lot of our audience is interested in history, so you'll be able to see if we were crazy or not and how we framed it based on the real history. I want to give you one more, but the spirit here is you're a mix of being on the tactical battlefield with your lieutenants. I'm sorry, I didn't say the obvious. You lead a company of the cotton balers in World War II. It's a fictional company, but the regiment's historical. You're the captain, or you may be a lieutenant early on. Your role-playing characters, your party, to use like a fantasy term, are your lieutenants, right? And your sergeant and so forth. So let's go to one more situation. Lethal insubordination. Friendly artillery pummels the enemy. Suddenly your sergeant shouts the order to advance without so much as a glance your way, and definitely without your command. You bark the counter order. The men stumble to a halt. Your sergeant turns, bleary-eyed from drink or shot. This is not how it appear in game, by the way. It's one of our design documents. And repeats his own command to the men. The barrel of his rifle shifts with a dreamlike slowness your way. So, Franklin, you're going to have to make a choice here, and I hope the people in the audience will make a choice. Shoot him before he gets my men killed. Let me tell you a little bit about consequences. Sergeant, now is not the time for an advance. Sergeant, I'm in command here. Knock the weapon from his grasp. So, Franklin, what are you going to do, man? No pressure.
Probably inform him now's not the time.
Now's not the time? Okay, so actually this is based on real history and historic choices that no one yet has picked, though maybe one of the audience did today, is shoot him. So, and I think you'll be interested to find out who the historic person was. If you remember the incredibly zealous character, I shouldn't laugh now given the seriousness of it, but the incredibly zealous Lieutenant Band of Brothers, Spears, the guy who runs across in the open and freaks out the Germans so much they don't even shoot at him. Guess what? This was Spears. And I twisted it slightly. I was reading up on it last night, so I wouldn't misquote it. The guy was drunk, the sergeant, and he actually pointed the gun at Spears. So, and I think Spears had ordered him to stop, and then Spears shot him dead. And there was talk of a court martial, but nothing was ever made of it. It was deemed appropriate, in the context. But this would be a sort of, oh, please, ridiculous Hollywood moment, but in fact it happened. And one of the things we say in the game is, truth is stranger in fiction. So I bet many of your audience have read historical accounts, and it's true. I mean, the things that happen are insane. So we captured a lot of that. I encourage the writers, we have two professional writers, to try not to draw from their imagination where they can and go to history, because there's so much just lying there. Plus, puts you in the moment. Now, you notice on the right, zeal, idealism, doctrine, cunning. Alan, our lead writer, had, I think, a pretty brilliant idea, which is we're going to put you on a role-playing journey as a leader to define who you are as a leader, whereas there aren't right answers, they're your answers with certain consequences. So maybe like Spears, you'll be a zealous guy. So maybe that will mean that, you're better at motivating the men for assault. But maybe you tend to get people killed more for various reasons, or you're not so good at empathy. We haven't worked all these out, so I'm waving my hands a lot right now because this part is still in development. This is kind of our version of Spears' actual journey. You can go look at his history. I believe Alan put together, and I think the event we just did for you, lethal insubordination is right there. So we hope by the end of the campaign you have your journey. These moments of blue are what you might call crucibles, critical moments for your development as a leader. You will make choices which we hope again are gray, meaning no obvious right or wrong. They just are your choice. Was Spears right to shoot the guy? We'll never know. But it wasn't clearly wrong. So, and it may have been right, but who can say? So we hope we'll put you on your own journey and you'll decide who you are. What I found playing a game on the interactive fiction side is, I've surprised myself in some ways when I'm put in these situations, who I actually am. Because the burden of command, the essence of the game is the tension between your responsibility for the mission and your responsibility for the men. And those are a balance, right? And there are some other burdens we can go into if you want. But it's one thing to say, oh, I would have been wonderfully idealistic and empathetic, and quite another thing to have to make the call. So your audience will understand this. Many of our audience will not, but we hope we'll educate them. I'll give you one more example. So when I played the narrative, Alan and Paul Wang and Alan Geese put me through some difficult situations, of course. One of them was a classic one, unfortunately, we probably recognize from modern military conflicts, which is it's in Sicily. There's a house, the Germans are in a house, it becomes clear there's civilians in the house. So you can call on artillery, and it'll certainly preserve your men, but it almost certainly will not preserve the civilians. So what are you going to do? Now, in that case, I decided actually to call on the artillery, but I've never forgotten that I decided to call the artillery. So we hope that what this will encourage people to see is, these decisions, you aren't necessarily making the right or wrong decisions. You're making your decisions, and even if they were right, you still have to live with them, and that's the burden of command. We've had a lot of vets donate their time and expertise to this, and one of the reasons they said they have is because we're one of the first experiences, maybe the only one in terms of games or things like them, to really put you in the position where you feel the burden. I should say, by the way, one last thing, I know I've gone on a bit to introduce the game, is that there's a quality called permadeath, which is a gamer term for, hey, when your character dies, that's it. So this is classic in a genre called roguelikes. When your character dies, there's no way back. So in Burden of Command, it wouldn't be much of a war simulation or experience if, oh, I'll just reload. Those of you who have played Medal of Honor, incredibly visceral. They kick our ass on, credible, visceral sensory experience. I played it and oh my God, I feel like I'm on Omaha Beach. On the other hand, the moment I could just reload, then death became an inconvenience. In our experience, if you send Lieutenant Dearborn up the hill and he gets killed, he's not coming back. So you'll have to live with that. I got some lieutenants killed. So I hope I've said enough to get the experience, turn-based, very tactical. We do things like the 4Fs. I'll talk a lot about that later if you want, and how you model the psychology of the battlefield. But we're also trying to get you on and off the battlefield to be a leader. Sorry, one last thing in my notes. Off the battlefield, your men may be in Naples. They may do things in Naples that maybe you didn't wish they had. I bet you're used to that, any of you who have command responsibility. We'll put the player through some paperwork problems, not too many. We don't really want to make this boring simulator, but we will do some. We will do letters home. And I will say that one of the most emotionally compelling moments I had was when I made some unfortunate decisions about procuring more gas and cutting corners on gas late in the campaign, and the writers made me pay for it in a historically appropriate way. And I was sweating my gas decision for a long time. I could go on about logistics because I get excited about logistics after this game, but maybe that just shows I'm a disturbed person.
well, even with the brief introduction of the game, I already love it just because of the fact I don't think military training brings up enough of the times where you're going to choose between bad answers. Like the only thing you have in front of you is bad answers, and you are, and I hate to use the word evil, but you're going to exercise evil on the battlefield, even when you attempt to be virtuous, or you're going to have these conflicting value systems that you're trying to engage with. So in a way, no matter what happens, you're going to make the wrong decision. So it's a matter of kind of making the least wrong decision and trying to live with what you were kind of enduring through at the time.
Well, that's a lesser of two evils. Good way to put it. Looking at you and what I think I remember your background, maybe you could describe it as spiritual triage. You're going to make the best calls you can in very unfortunate decisions.
So what actually started this project? Because it seems like a fascinating take. Was it like Band of Brothers that you're watching, or was it some other catalyst that said, hey, I'm going to go make this video game?
Well, part of it, I think I was somewhat predestined. So, my parents. So let me talk a little bit more about my father. That's my father giving a talk in front of the White House. He was an eminent historian as well as a World War II vet, history of technology. And so I was raised as a historian talking at the dinner table. So I was, pretty hard for me not to be interested in history early on. I'm a Southerner, Virginian, so I grew up, reading, Stillness and Appomattox, always interested in the Civil War. So part of me, I think I was just waiting for the right catalyst. Well, the right catalyst was somewhat surprising. So my original intent was to do a squad-based game, meaning kind of like Band of Brothers, but tactical. Let me talk about it this way. Most games in war are really two types. They're either a strategy and tactics game, in a way that somebody's interested in military history is interested in, oh, let me move the units around, see if I can do better than Napoleon, right? Or name your general of choice. Or maybe I could have handled this engagement, moving my units better, at D-Day. Only a certain percent of people are interested in that because you have to have a lot of context for it, right? You have to have already been interested in history typically. And it's a little dry for most people. The other type's first-person shooter. Very visceral, running around with a rifle. Typically not terribly realistic. There are, significant exceptions. I know Band of Brothers tried pretty hard to be credible about it, but not leadership games. So I was sort of thinking rather conventionally. I would say the squad-based tactical, I was going to make it like a game called Panzer General, which is fairly light, but it'd be squad-centric, tactic-oriented. But what changed things? Well, curiously enough, I was playing a game far afield, which is a good trick to be creative, called Crusader Kings 2. And that is a game about being a head of a royal family, a duke, a baron, possibly the king, in a early Renaissance kingdom in England or family in France or Germany. Very clever game from Paradox Studios. And you run your family, right? Your family is a royal, well, not royal family. It's a general. It's a noble family. That's what I'm looking for. And I was sitting there playing. My wife was in the background like, why do you keep having all these babies in this game? What kind of game is this? Because, my sons and daughters were having babies, and I was running a family, and encourages a lot of backstabbing and very Game of Thrones, but quite respectful of the history. They put a lot of time into things like obeying papal constraints and so forth. I mean, it's amazing how popular it is, given how much it tries to hit things like primogeniture, which means the senior son gets things first. Anyway, historically centered game. Playing it, and it suddenly hit me, one of those little eureka moments. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to follow a family of officers across Europe, across World War II. And to put it differently, to follow a band of brothers, right? So that was the genesis. And from there, I'd already been interested in the leadership side. I wanted to make the game have leaders, but it wasn't salient for me. I realized that was really fresh, important to me personally, because I've always been interested in trying to be a leader. Been a leader in various business contexts. And so from then on, it just was a clear focus. It was an unusual focus and simple, but hard to achieve. On my personal journey, I was always interested in becoming a leader. And I remember reading a biography of Eisenhower early on, and I was very struck by his saying he felt leadership was one of the few things that could be learned. And the context for him was he was in North Africa. We just landed in World War II, and Franklin Rommel was kicking our butts. And it was at Battle of Kazarine. And he was freaked out by his own account. He was really worried about what was going to happen here. And the men at headquarters could see he was freaked out about it. So they started to be freaked out about it. And he learned from that. Thank God, it worked out for a variety of reasons. But after that, he said, no matter how bad it is, you've got to preserve the facade of leadership. If you're calm, then they'll think they can be calm. Oh, he doesn't think it's that bad. Maybe it isn't that bad, right? And then they'll be more managed. So he felt leadership could be learned, which I've always remembered. And so in some sense, this game is an attempt to, well, maybe you can learn leadership. I'm not claiming this is the simulator that teaches you the right way, but I hope that it'll make you think about it and evolve who you are as a leader, because if you trust Eisenhower, and I trust Eisenhower, it's something you can learn.
I know that you contacted a tremendous amount of people, or at least when I'm interacting out in the middle Twitter community, I ran into a few people saying, hey, you got to take a look at this new video game. And they're like, yes, we understand burden of command. We talked to them last week. And it's like, oh, okay, well, should have gotten to it earlier.
In other words, what you're really saying is we spam too many people.
No, no, no. Well, you hit the right people, I should say. I haven't talked to the
Oh, I'm
wrong
talking to
people
you, aren't I?
heard it yet. Uh, appreciate it. So with that, what historical kind of theories or military theories are you drawing upon to kind of make sure that this game is battlefield
Well, now
realistic?
I warned you, right? I'm the son of an historian, right? And I've got too much schooling. So you've asked a terrible question because now I'm going to get excited and probably talk too much about some of this. But I am really enthusiastic. I'm deeply interested. I do think I bring something different. I don't know if I'm going to be right. Your audience knows more than me in some ways, in many ways, but I might have a fresh perspective. So that's what I'll try to communicate. I'm pretty confident I'll say one or two things here about seagulls and chimpanzees that just you don't normally hear in discussions of the battlefield. Now, before somebody turns off the YouTube, that chimpanzees and seagulls, I have a background in animal behavior. I'll get back to that. But think animal models, right? Doctors, people we respect. They'll sometimes say, hey, will this medicine work in the context of this animals? This form of mammal behavior for what we might call depression is a good model of depression. I think they even look at things like stress a little bit this way. I could give an animal example of that actually. Pretty interesting. Uh, so I'm going to say some fresh things I hope there, but let me start a little more conventionally now that I've teased with a weird one with the animals. First, they sort of core anchors in terms of books for us. So one of the qualities of being a leader is the spiritual or moral side of being a leader, which Carl Malentes is a remarkable individual. He's a very successful novelist, also Vietnam vet. He wrote a book which I consider for us in some ways a spiritual, moral Bible. Not meaning he has the answers, but the right kind of questions around war. And the book is on the screen, I believe, What It Is Like to Go to War. And Carl's amazing. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, but that's not what's amazing. What's amazing is that he left that position of privilege voluntarily to serve in Vietnam. I think how many people didn't choose to serve in Vietnam, and he left a very privileged position, very cushy to go serve. Became a first lieutenant, so forth, and he writes about his experiences. And he says, I think, some very, very significant things about the spiritual side of war. So let me talk about that. When I say the spiritual side of war, I don't mean the nice side of war. So he has a metaphor. He says, when you go to war, inevitably you enter the temple of Mars, the temple of the god of war. And it is inherently spiritual because what is more spiritual than death, life and death? That doesn't mean it isn't a temple in hell. And what he believes, one of the things the military doesn't always do, I think it's getting much better from the things I've read, and I think he said things along that, is the military prepares our leaders very well and our soldiers for command in the tactical sense and for firing and for the handling of the weapons of war. But it doesn't necessarily prepare them as well for what it means for your friend dies right next to you. So I'm not saying we're preparing you for it in burden of command. God, if we're doing that, we probably shouldn't play it, it'd be too horrific. But what we can do is we can remind people that that's part of the leadership and part of the war experience. And so when you go to war, you enter the Temple of Mars. And to be kind of light spoiler is when you land in Morocco, 1942, Operation Torch. Our metaphor for that for the writers is the Temple of Mars. Our goal is to put the player in the Temple of Mars, make them think about that and how they're going to deal with it and what leadership stance they'll take towards it. Okay, so that's the spiritual side. Another book that's another book I'd recommend, I'll speak to one more of those, is called World Within War. It's very interesting. This is a less personal account of what is the psychological, personal experience of going to war. And this academic, I think he may have been a vet. No, I'm not sure he was a vet, but he studied all the accounts from World War II. And he characterizes the psychological journey this way, I think quite interesting. So when the young men would land on the beach in Morocco or D-Day, when they're getting on the shores there, the thought before that was, man, I'm going to get out there, I'm going to kick Hitler's ass, we'll be in Berlin in a week or two, and this war will be over. So that's kind of their opening, partially bravado, but they don't know. And then they get on the battlefield and they're instantly shocked by things like, where's the enemy? because the enemy doesn't particularly want to die. So the enemy is not making a point of being visible, but the enemy's making a point of shooting at you. So that's a terrible shot, right? And then people start to get wounded. So the next stage, according to this book, and he sort of carries it from various anecdotes and studies, is something like, oh, some of my friends could get killed here. And then the next stage starts to be, oh, I might get seriously wounded in this. Then the next stage is something like, man, it is only a matter of time before the bullet finds me. And now they're hoping, this is kind of like typically late war, World War II, 44, 45. They're hoping for the silver bullet, gives them a wound that pulls. I mean, that's depressing when you're at the stage where you're hoping for the wound that pulls you out. So I think those two books are critical for guiding the writers and the experience. Now, let me shift a little bit to more conventional things. So battle leadership, this was recommended by a Marine on the team early on, apparently still read in the Marine schools. This is by a guy who actually became a German Panzer Corps commander in World War II, but was, I think, a captain or above in World War I. I'll give you one anecdote from him. He talks about about the nature of the battlefield and leadership. So one thing, this is the kind of thing I draw on pretty heavily in thinking about the battlefield. So he gives an anecdote of the Germans. They're actually on the front with Austria-Hungary in World War I. And the men's morale is sinking. Why is the men's morale sinking? Well, the enemy has planes flying on their side, and they don't. So now the men feel like this is an unfair match. The enemy has planes. I think they had artillery too, and we don't. So the morale is going down. But now planes show up on their side. Oh, the men are okay again. This is a fair match now. And we do this in the game. So this is called, in a book that's really our sort of tactical Bible, Brains and Bullets, Weapon Push and Weapon Pull. And it's the soldier's assessment as to whether this is an unfair match or not, and whether the enemy has qualitatively good weapons or not. So if you go watch our tactical video, there are 2 teasers out on YouTube. The second one, you'll notice something that's unusual for a game on war. So a tank appears, and there's a Lieutenant Dearborn. The tank does not fire a gun. German tank appears. And yet the men start to take suppression and shock, because they're infantry, and they were not expecting the enemy to have a tank, and they know they're outclassed right now. So they're taking a psychological shock value. And they're thinking, how do I get to cover? Or maybe I need to get out of the situation. And nobody has fired any bullets yet. I remember an account from a German small unit leader in Russia. And he's out there with the Italians. Italians always get the brunt of these stories. And the Germans are there. Of course, the German telling it, but there is some truth to this. And the Russians are coming. The Italians look at this situation and they leave. Because that's a rational, emotional decision, right? Because now's the time to leave. They haven't been shot at yet. They're not going to get shot yet because the Russians are too far away. Good time to exit. Now, when the Russians are close, it might be a stupid time to exit because you stand up and run, you're going to be shot down. So those kind of things, those tactical psychological behaviors, are what I'm thinking about. How can I try to capture those? Shock. When will men run? When will they disobey orders? We have things called morale checks. Those of you who have played cardboard games like Squad Leader, and there's some more modern ones like Band of Brothers, and there's less of that available in computer games, maybe a few. Steel Panthers may have done some of that. There's a morale check. And the men are deciding, am I going to do this action? Now, this is where leadership comes in. So I'll talk about another psychological example in the spirit of Brains and Bullets. So there's a phenomenon called, let me see if I can remember it, something like dispersal of responsibility. And the phenomenon is, if there are a lot of people present, I'll tell you a personal story. So I was in college, and I was coming down a hill, and somebody was on a bike ahead of me, and they had a horrible accident, fell off their bike in a serious way, coming down a hill, and they're lying on the ground bleeding, pretty bad. And everybody's staring at them. To be frank, I was in shock too. I was kind of staring at, like, I didn't really know what to do. And this is a classic phenomenon, diffusion of responsibility. I think that's it. You can look it up. There is some challenge to this, just to be academic about it now. But anyway, let's go with it. So what the Red Cross teaches you, I've done CPR, and you know better than me, is what do? You instantly point at someone and say, you go call 911. Get over there and see if you can find you. Come help me, right? People want to help, but they're not sure what to do. So the same thing can happen on the battlefield. So in Brains and Bullets, very hard to get statistics on this. But It's something like, a group of men and they're deciding to assault the enemy. In other words, go out there and maybe get a bayonet in their stomach, which nobody wants. Visceral fighting. Maybe it's 30 to 40% they can get themselves motivated. Now, if there's a leader of some form, whether NCO or lieutenant or whatever, that might bring it up to 40 or 50%, or maybe the next increment up. And if you have somebody they particularly respect, maybe a senior NCO, it doesn't have to be higher in the ranks, but let's just keep it simple. Lieutenants, president they respect, might go up to 70, 80%. Lieutenant Winters and Band of Brothers shows up. There's a reason the men get up, right? And so in burden of command, if you put the leader there, you may get them to do the assault, even though they don't want to, because they're sane. So I'll go a little bit further down the path to paint the psychological map. So in burden of command, there's your squad. You want to attack the enemy. You want to do the 4Fs. Let's say you've done suppressive fire. You've fired, fixed, flanked, etc. And you're trying to order the assault. And let's assume you do what's called a bolster, which is an action. We try to do leadership actions on the battlefield. Bolster is basically pumping up the morale. Come on, we can do this. It's like Winters literally kicking their ass. Remember, I don't know if it happened in the real world, but Band of Brothers, a movie, series, he's literally, they're all lying on the ground under machine gun fire, and he's kicking their ass. Get up, get up, crazily. And because he's taking a risk, right, could get shot. I say, he's willing to risk it. I'm going to get up. I can't leave him there. So get them up. They pass a morale check, maybe because you bolstered. They're running towards the enemy. Now, the opposite problem starts to happen. This happens in the game, and if you believe the books I'm pointing to here, happens in reality. You get close to the defender. Now, the defender's thinking, holy crap, I'm about to be in a knife fight. I might die here. I mean, nobody wants that. Unless you're psychopathic. So now they're going to typically, if you believe the reports, do one of two things. They're not going to fight melee, dramatic as that is. They're going to surrender, or they're going to run. So if they think they can get to cover, whatever seems to have the best chance of survival. Now, sometimes they will fight, okay? But if you've been putting down a lot of suppression fire and making their lives miserable, they're pretty inclined to give up. That's why one of the reasons you do it. So we model that. So Brains and Bullets go through a lot of these kind of things. I can go on a long time with anecdotes in the spirit, but I hope you've gotten a flavor of it. Let me see if anything else I should point to. I also, my research background, I founded and ran research lab for Accenture, which is a huge consulting firm, consults to Fortune 500 companies around the globe. And my job was to do innovation. One of the tricks I learned in innovation is reinvent the wheel. And that sounds like really bad advice, but I think it's really good advice. I was taught it by my professor. And the advice is don't go study some expert's view. Like, thank God I didn't read Brains and Bullets first. That would be learn the wheel from the expert. And guess what? People who've invented the wheel can articulate the wheel pretty well. So if you're any normal person, you read the book, you think, oh, that's a good theory. I think that is the way the world works. I'm no different. I read a well-articulated book, it takes over my mind. So one of the tricks I learned in research is go to the primary material. So early on, I spent a lot of time reading first-order accounts of various leaders. What infantry attacks, Rommel in World War I. Reading other ones that people were pointing out to me. We were soldiers once and young in Vietnam. Great for conveying the chaos and the fog of war. Oh, my God. Just confusion all the time. So then I started reading the secondary one. I started to develop my own ideas. So in that spirit, the other books here are these first order ones. And by the way, I encourage your audience, please send me for my stack of shame. I cannot promise I'll read each of them, but I will put them on lists. Send me a small unit, books you think are particularly good in leadership from, anything you think applies, World War I to the present. I've read a decent amount, but I'm always interested in more, especially from your audience. So I read a lot of primary. I think I've trained this mostly give you spirit. So let me check my notes. So I read books explicitly on leadership. There are tons of those that are sort of very tactical. There are many sort of business ones. Infantry Battle is a great one. Read about World War I. What else do I draw on for materials? So I've given you these books, but I also draw on the team. I'm particularly proud to put this group of people up because I'm humbled by them and I learn from them every day. And you'll see we have a variety of ranks from actually a variety of nationalities, obviously a little biased towards U.S. I'm American. And we have a decent number of combat vets as well. And so they've stayed with us through the narrative, fed back on what's right or wrong. Again, we're game first. We're not trying to create a technical manual on leadership. But we are trying to be faithful. Let me say as well as I can, respectful of the experience. So they help us stay that way. And Marlentes, I alluded to him earlier. Go look at his books. He's written quite a few. Brunts. This is a general look at the experience of the infantrymen through our wars. He has stuck with us faithfully, reading every single interactive fiction thing we've done, giving us feedback, and trying to keep us honest. So he's not responsible in what we do, but he has helped greatly. So I think I've hit all the things I've done. Oh, and then there are places like you. I am going to plug, gosh darn it, Evolving Warfighter. The reason I got interested in Evolving Warfighter is he did an absolutely excellent. How much am I getting paid here? I want to know how much I'm going to get this. Did an excellent one on who's the crazy German World War One?
Ernst Jünger.
Ernst Jünger, and yeah. So I have his book now in my stack of shame, thanks to you. What's the name of the book?
Storm of Steel.
Thank you. So he's a really hardcore World War One German, but very interested in the psychology and so forth. And Franklin did a great video on that. So I try to watch things like that. I also I read the company leader blog that comes from, I'm sure, a number of you all subscribers. I'm always interested to be pointed at further things I should be doing to educate myself. So in net summary, what I will claim is I spent my career learning and trying to learn how to learn. And so I take this very seriously. I told you about my family background. And so I listen hard before I make my mistakes.
Given your background in psychology and neurophysiology, could you tell us a little about those fields and then how it influenced the design of this game?
If there's anybody left on this talk, I bet they've been waiting around just to laugh at me. What the hell is this fool doing bringing up seagulls and chimpanzees? Patience. Okay, I did promise I'd approach it from a different angle. So let me tell my seagull story. It's so cool. So I was a student and I was cycling around Scotland as it happened. I had some food out. I was sitting on a bench and there was a seagull there. And the seagull was interested in my food. And this interesting thing started to happen. At this stage, I was already starting to worry a lot about animal behavior because I've been working with some psychologists who studied animal behavior. And what I noticed was very interesting. It was he kept going back and forth, hovering. So at the one moment, he'd be looking down at the food, ooh, the crumbs. Then I started to torture him. I threw some food out, but I didn't throw it to him. I may have done that initially, give me a rest. Sadistically, I threw it sort of in between us. He's like, oh, look at that food. I want that. He'd start to go forward. Then he'd look up. Uh-oh, big human. He'd back up. And then he'd go forward. The poor guy, was going back and forth like this. And it suddenly hit me, here in space and is moving back and forth are two motivations that are obviously in him. On the one hand, he's obviously experiencing fear. On the other hand, he's also experiencing hunger or lust for the food, right? So that was when I started to see that, this emotional behavior is so central to how people behave. I think non-academics maybe understand this better than academics do. But, if you go look at people who have a background in AI, what did they want to do? They wanted to create a machine that worked on logic, right? Well, I don't think people work on logic. And it's not even necessarily a good way to solve problems, right? And we all love to believe that that we reason and then we get to the answer, and that's why we do things. But in fact, I think it's mostly the opposite, which is, we have emotional reactions to people we deal with, to issues that we feel threatening to our values or not, and then we rationalize. So if I were to characterize most people, I certainly would characterize myself, we rationalize. And I'm not going to become political here, but I will say, if you look in the US, at the current, or many other countries, unfortunately, political divide and furor, I think it would be fair to say that for either side, argument in the sense of rational argument, oh, you should really believe me, I'm right about this because of these 4 facts, almost never works. And why is that? Because people are not operating on that basis. They're operating on some deep convictions, to put a positive term on it, but I might call it emotional commitments that they are going to take whatever you say and they're going to reshape it to fit their worldview. And notice I didn't say which side. I think this is true of both sides. So why do I think animal behavior then is relevant to understanding the battlefield? I am not suggesting we are seagulls, but I am suggesting that when we moved on to chimpanzees, there was a famous book, I think in the 60s or 70s, called The Naked Ape. And I think that's a wonderful way to put it, right? That somewhere in us there's that primate background. And again, I'm not saying we're apes, but we certainly draw somewhere on that emotionally, or at least it seems similar. So I worked with a famous cognitive psychologist, primatologist, cognitive psychologist, fancy way to say somebody who studies how people think, called David Premack at Penn. Brilliant man. And he studied chimpanzee language. I mean, some of you got a lot of exposure. He was, I think, one of the best researchers in that. Can you teach chimps language through symbols? How much can they reason? Roughly, by the way, chimpanzees are probably equivalent of like 3 or 4-year-olds in their reasoning capacity. And I have 4 children. If you know 3 or 4-year-olds are pretty damn smart. Sometimes they outsmart you. And chimps, sometimes they outsmart you too. So why animals are so important is they don't have language. And so you get to see behind the screen of language. We're so good at, putting a facade, a front up of language that hides what's really going on many times. So after I started dealing with chimps, I got to train them and so forth, worked at some of his research centers. I would do little experiments. Like I remember it was around the Gulf War or something. And I thought, I'm going to treat nations like animals, meaning I'm going to turn off the sound. And I see that somebody's coming up from, name your nation, France, US, Russia, Middle Eastern country. And I think, what's in their interest? What would they sort of care about, like the seagull cared about the food, what do they care about? And I'm going to predict what they'll come out saying. And I turn it back on, and what a shock. It was most of the time pretty damn consistent, which was underlying and driving them in terms of their interests or emotions. Now, you notice I'm doing a little tricky maneuver there. I'm connecting emotions to interests. Let me talk about that briefly. So that's and then I'm going to get to the battlefield, I promise. So it's very obvious with the seagull and food, right? I think we can be pretty confident he's feeling hunger. He wants to get to that food, but we can imagine he's feeling fear, right? So obviously a small country threatened by a big country, pick your neutral in World War II, is not going to go around, trying to piss Adolf off casually, right? Because they recognize who's the bigger animal there. So fear, we can understand physical fear. And when I say the chimps, it's very clear that physical fear. When they're thinking about getting into a fight or a confrontation, go to the zoo and watch this. They're quite clear on who's bigger or looks more scary. And they're trying to look like the scariest guy. But now it gets subtler, more like us. I remember one of the things that really struck me early on was I went in to see these little chimps, and one of them, the other one started crying. He ran over and gave a big hug. I thought, oh my God, just like a person. I mean, he cared. He gave him a hug. So they care about all kinds of social things. So let's take social fear. Now I'm going to start connecting in the battlefield. So, when a chimp is in a confrontation, he's not just thinking about, could I get hurt? Oh, he's thinking about, could I get hurt? But he's also thinking, man, if I back down here, how's it going to look? How's my prestige going to be? They care, right? Because they want to be the alpha male and not lose that status because all kinds of privileges if you're the alpha male. I'll leave it at that. So, and I think any of us who've been through high school, there's all kinds of forms, whatever your gender or, disposition, in which, status contests go on. They can be pretty unpleasant, pretty scary. And if you're like most of us, we fear the social dragon, right? I don't particularly want to go out there and wear odd clothes today in my neighborhood. How minor is that? So we're always thinking about prestige. And so watching the animals, made me think, what's going on in these social motivations? So they're thinking about social fear. So from what I read in battlefield accounts, one of the reasons, stupid or not, I'm not sure it's stupid at all, that men fight. One of it's bond, right? Like, the hug, right? They care. They care about each other. They're not fighting for the nation state at that point. They're fighting for their fellow Marine or, grunt. But another one, honestly, I believe, your audience can correct me, but a lot of the vets have agreed with me. They don't want to be shamed. They don't want to show the white feather. I mean, everybody else is getting up to go over the trench in World War I. I can't be the guy who doesn't. Now, probably arguably pretty irrational decision, you know, except for you won't lose face. But it's incredibly important to people not to lose face. And so when I think about the battlefield and Burning Command, I'm thinking about not losing face, right? So as the units, your squads get more and more experience. That's sort of a proxy for the getting more and more bonded to each other. They're more and more willing to fight for each other. They're also probably getting more stressed. They are, not probably. And over time, that will make them less willing to fight because they freak out more readily. They overreact to threats, threatening, situations. They might look fine on the surface, but underneath they're going to overreact. I don't claim to be an expert on stress, but it's an approximation of some of it, which is often, you hear the sound and you overreact because experience has taught you to overreact when you're on the battlefield. So unlike many games, the leaders and the squads will gain stress over time. They gain experience, which is kind of a proxy for bond. Central qualities for you as a leader is to develop respect and trust with your men. So respect is really sort of, do they think you know how to fight? Do you tend to win the fights or not? And we haven't done this math yet, but I have a decent idea of how I'll do it. Sort of an approximation of, it's typically Lieutenant Luke winning his fights or not. Do I respect him and his ability to get a good outcome here? Therefore, it might improve my ability to follow him. Another one is trust. Does Luke seem to give a damn about me, or is he really just pursuing his career? So let me give you a tactical game analogy. Since I'm waving my hand telling stories, what does this mean mechanically? So again, this one I'm waving my hands on now. I'm trying to stay straight when it isn't written yet. Some of the things are, some aren't. So the way this works, I believe, is if the leader unit, you have the little portrait on the map like we saw early in Sicily. If the leader is with the unit takes fire. This will build trust. And the basic calculus for the squad is, hey, this guy's putting his ass on the line with me. Okay, I think I can respect this guy, because he's willing to risk himself. There'll also be narrative decisions. You'll certainly be put in positions where you have to say, please your superior at the cost of the men, or the other way around. And it might actually be the right decision to please the superior because you might be able to get better support, or whatever it is you need from the men, or you don't want them pissed at you because God knows what situation they'll put you in next. So, but the men may not feel that way if you chose the one that to their face is like, oh, Jesus, he canceled our leave so we could have more training. That's one of the ones they put you through, right? You bastard. But it might be the best thing for them. That doesn't mean they haven't lost some trust. On the other hand, now back to the battlefield. So you can sit up there, oh, I'm the heroic leader, Luke. I'm always up with men. Look at me. I'm such a goody two-shoes. Well, first, obviously, you might become a casualty or dead. You gain 1/4 set. So you're going to keep running around out front. I mean, you are counting your days, just like the real junior officers were in World War II. Casualty rates were very high. Also, you'll take suppression. And I can talk a lot about suppression. Maybe we'll do that when we get to the combat model. But suppression starts to reduce your ability to lead. You get fewer and fewer command points. So if you're up front being heroic with the men, you're getting suppressed too, unless you want to be a casualty. In other words, you're keeping your head down. And so your commands are going down, how many orders you can give. And so you may start to become a lousy leader, meaning you are unable to keep control of the situation. On the other hand, if you stay back, so if you stay a few hexes back in the game, well, now you're not taking fire. So you keep all your commands. So you can really keep your platoon organized or your company, right? But now, oh, Luke's hanging back a lot, So we hope we put you in what's the right answer here? The right answer is probably some mix. Sometimes you should be back. Sometimes you need to lead from the front for that difficult assault. So I hope you're starting to see the connection between seagulls and chimpanzees and people. We're not the same. We care about things like honor. I don't really think chimps care about honor, but there's a connection between our desire to be thought well of by our peers and the animals. And if you were to take away the essence of what I think I do differently, is I start from trying to think about the emotional and deep psychology aspect of the battlefield, which I mean, not a place encouraging quiet contemplation. And I think about that dynamic, and then I think as a leader says, here are these people, men and women trying, in World War II men, trying to put some order on the chaos. And when we get to the model, I'll talk about that. But in some sense, the essence of leadership is trying to command those emotions, get people to be aggressive, get people to show courage, lead from the front. and motivate people, which is an emotional activity. It's not a let's check the receipt. Have we done steps 1 to 3? Motivation is not check step 1 to 3. So that's how I look at the battlefield. I'm not saying the tactics aren't important. We do the tactics, and I can talk about that.
Well, I definitely love the idea of your leaders getting less kind of command points, because I talk to my sons all the time, because if you're a captain on the battlefield, they're like, oh, do you shoot the enemy? And it's like, well, the captain on the battlefield fights with a radio. I fight with a squad, or I'm calling in airstrikes. I'm talking to higher. If you're the captain using your individual rifle, something's gone incredibly wrong, because you're acting like the private should be acting. So it's like knowing when to step back, or that you have to be the orchestra, kind of the maestro, coordinating things, and if you get too involved in the chasing after the enemy with your own rifle, then you lose track of all the other people looking for your guidance.
That's an excellent example. And I think of the Band of Brothers. I draw a lot, as you can see, from Band of Brothers. I think it has a lot of respect, and I do hit a lot of the right things, in my humble opinion. There's a scene, I think, Winters he's become a captain, and he wants to run forward and lead the difficult attack. And the colonel pretty much, or the major, has to say, no, your job is to stay back and manage this, which makes him feel like he's kind of failing the men. But in some ways, he's failing the men if he runs forward.
Or how does your combat model in the game differ from other games?
So I keep this up on my desk. A cheat is I have all fun. I've done a version of this with Fun Pictures, Band of Brothers, but I can't use their media. So imagine there's some great chaos scenes in Band of Brothers, but this is from historical pictures. So this is my model of, in essence, of the game. Core pillars of design. The central word is lead, of course, but the context for it is chaos. So one of the slogans I say, and by chaos I mean the battlefield. One of the slogans I say about Burden of Command is, if you want to be in control, don't play Burden of Command. If you want to lead in the face of chaos, maybe this is for you. So what does chaos mean? Well, first it means what you might expect. Really, the enemy is not particularly interested in making this a good process for you. So they're doing unpleasant things. There's easy ones. A lot of fog of war. That's not novel. Other games do fog of war, but I'm going to try and paint an overall picture, which I hope is somewhat distinctive. So there's fog of war chaos. There's chaos in the sense the enemy is not doing what you'd like them to do. There's, artillery is coming down. Now there is psychological chaos. So of course, this is where I hope I'm getting some distinction. There's a great game out there from, I think, 1990s, Close Combat, that does do some of this, psychological battlefield. So they were the innovators there. I know that like the Marines have done their version of that and so forth. So it has been used in some military training. So I don't claim we're first to do psychological battlefield. I would argue that maybe we're the first to emphasize leadership in that context. And I hope that our psychological model has some novel things. But let me go back to the details. So I gave you the example of shock earlier. Remember the Stug, the German, self-propelled gun appears, and the Americans freak out, but they haven't been shot at yet. So there's shock, right? Suddenly all your men moments ago were doing fine, and they're freaking out because they just realized that they're dealing with armor. And suddenly you can't command your platoon, and maybe your platoon is not in a good place for you not to be commanding them. So now this is the time when you better start thinking about how to spend your leadership points. So your leadership points are bolster to improve their morale, press. Press is going to push them beyond their limits right now to do more than they might. It's going to add to their stress. But you might get them in their action, get them the hell out of that situation. We kind of paint that in the teaser. You might need to rally them, right? You've got to pause for a moment and really try to get them, organized again to be coherent. But it's just the time to pause and get them organized. Maybe you should just drag them as much as you can out of the way. Or maybe we don't have this yet, flag for thing not having yet. A lot of other stuff we do now. I hope eventually, maybe on your squad sides, this is the time to be heroic and charge some machine guns. May not have been a good decision, but maybe you should support them at this point, because maybe this is a turning point. You have to make the most of it. Or maybe you just have a responsibility to support them rather than let's let them get cut down. I watched a remarkable Medal of Honor. There's a Netflix's Medal of Honor series, and they covered actually a guy in the 3rd Infantry Division. He may have been a cotton baler art group. His squad or platoon's getting pinned down. It's in Italy, I think. I think God basically as leader decides, I don't know how rational or berserk, maybe a mix of both. He decides to charge the enemy as I think he's a sergeant. Single sergeant. And he gets hit 3 times, and he keeps going. And he actually gets up there, and Germans are just freaked out, and they surrender. But they could have killed him in principle. There were 8 or 10 of them, but they're freaked out by this guy psychologically. Unfortunately, he was killed by some more Germans coming up. So he did die, so he's a Medal of Honor winner. But that would be an example of Berserk. We don't do it, but it's a good yet. I hope we will. An example of psychological chaos, both positive and negative. So that paints the landscape on which you have to lead. And now you're going to spend your command points. And if you're up front being a heroic guy, the command points are going down. Command points are your ability to do actions. And if we're a good game designer, as well as maybe a leader, arguably, we're not going to give you as many command points as you'd like. So I hope you're always sitting there thinking like, crap, well, if I only had 5 command points, I can handle the situation. But bastard Luke only gave me 3. Forgive my English. And, what the hell do I do now? I hope you're struggling. So, and maybe you're thinking I should stop. There's another command, which is assess, which is as time goes by, something happens called friction, and you start to lose leader points. So I'm representing abstractly that, there are miscommunications going on. You're losing track of what's actually happening with third squad. You're getting conflicting reports. And so your command points are going down. You might need to stop, look around, and assess the situation, which will restore your command point. But it's just really the turn when your men are taking machine gun fire to stop and assess. So I hope you have a difficult decision there. Now, on to my model of leadership. I think you're going to ask later what were hard decisions in the game, but I'll do one of them now. Hard decision in the game is, what the hell is leadership? I mean, how many millions of books have been written on that? So maybe not so much on the details of military leadership all the time, though I pointed some books, but in general, it's a hard question, and particularly hard for me and the team, because I have to make it operational. I can't wave my hand and say, well, leadership is kind of you do the right thing at the right time, and you're heroic when you need to. It all has to be mechanical because it's a computer. So I had to spend a lot of cycles on what I would define as leadership, and I had to make a lot of choices because I can't do everything. It'll just become a mess. And, leadership's much more complex than the game can convey. But I had to pick some salient things. So what do I think are the 3 core aspects of leadership, at least for Burden of Command? They are direct, motivate, and preserve. So what is direct? Direct is what you think it is, right? And most games in war on the tactical level do that, which is, hey, you give orders to the units and they do things, and you want to do smart things like lay down suppressive fire, and then you want to flank them. You want to use combined arms, and I can go on and that kind of stuff, but we support those kind of things. That's not so novel, so maybe we do the model in some ways that are interesting compared to others. Like I gave you the example of the morale checks and the assaults, the bayonets in the stomach or not. But we do follow a limited command capacity, right? So you're always struggling with what the right call is, I hope. Okay. Motivate. There is actually a long history of these on squad level games, like the original progenitor of any tactical game, Squad Leader, which was a 1970s tactical board game, and many computer games and board games have been inspired by it since then. And they had the idea that, squads will take morale checks, and leaders are there to help with those. Their morale checks are more like, oh, you take fire, well, I break. And I don't buy that model as much. There's a great board game called Band of Brothers, and he studied a lot of the primary materials. And his conclusion, I tend to agree with it, is, mostly when you take fire, it's not about breaking. When people are taking fire, they know what to do. Mostly they know what they should do is keep their damn head down, right? Because I don't particularly want to get it blown off at this second. So the effect of suppression is basically, it was reducing your capacity to act. You're not going to stand up as far as much. You're not going to move as much. You do move. You're kind of moving, crouching, and running. So in the game, morale, which is the sense of quality of the troops, goes down under suppression fire. But you don't break. Well, sometimes you may, but you don't break typically. So when does motivation matter? When you're asked to do difficult things. Remember, I gave the example of assault. Another example of difficult is maybe you're asked to run across the open field. I'll give you an example from one of the primary materials. There's a great book. I'd have to look it up. It's not in the list I gave you today. But anyway, it's the captain in World War II. And the book opens wonderfully with a scene where it's late war. There's an open valley. The German machine guns across the field. They have to assault across the field, open field. All the lieutenants have come to him during the night saying, sir, you've got to stop this. This is crazy. We're all going to get killed here. And he's talked to his superior. Superior said, you got to do it. So he now orders a command. He gets up, runs into the field, looks back behind him, nobody has gotten up. Brilliant start to the book. I wanted to read the rest of the book to find out what happened, because of course you wasted page 350 to tell me what happened. And I'm not going to tell you, but if somebody thinks me, I'll tell you the book so you can go read it and they get a sale. But my point is motivating, right? So it's all about managing morale on the battlefield. Now, people die in Burden of Command, just like the war. It is about casualties. But most games, model combat is bang, 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 bang. They die, right? I mean, there are about 6,000 games of combat. Bang, 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 bang. Shoot them enough, they die. In our game, hey, you shoot them at them a lot. They're not stupid. They get down behind a cover, and it's frankly pretty hard to hit people behind stone walls with bullets. Now, artillery is an exception. Artillery does tend to cause casualties. But small arms, World War II, 8,000 bullets before a casualty. If you believe brains and bullets, it's now getting to be something like 70,000 bullets before a casualty in Afghanistan, I think, or Iraq, because guess what? The insurgents aren't particularly interested in having a stand-up fight with the American firepower. So in our game, it's not about casualties. So they matter and they have ramifications. It's about suppression. So why am I bringing it up? So we motivate you. We manage morale. A morale model is very simple. If you're taking suppression, you will move further less. You will shoot less effectively, and you basically become combat ineffective with enough suppression. Your job is not to let that happen, but to make it happen to the enemy. Put a little video out on our Twitter account recently kind of illustrating that. Like, don't let the enemy flank you, because that is unpleasant for the troops. Don't let them, surprise you. Don't let them catch you in the open. That's about the worst thing you can do from a lot of stuff I read. You want casualties. That's a good time to get casualties. You run in front of an unsuppressed enemy. A couple others. But do that to the enemy. So we try to teach you to do that to the enemy. Finally, you're going to be trying to build that trust and respect in the narrative and on the battlefield in the ways I've described. Preserve. So just speaking as a gamer for a moment, there are games like XCOM or Panzer General or Steel Panthers, or any role-playing game where, you want your units to gain experience, and if they're dead, they really aren't going to gain experience too well. So just playing the game, you'd like to preserve your men. But we hope that you're getting attached to your Lieutenant Dearborn, or your Lieutenant Stern, and to maybe even a little bit to First Squad. That's a little abstract. And over time, you don't want them to die, not because, it'll inconvenience me for my next battle. You're thinking, I don't want these guys to die. Dearborn's been here since 42, 45. Do I really want to send Dearborn up the hill again? So that's where the writer's job is, to create that sense of empathy for the men. But sometimes you do have to send them up the hill. And then finally, there's force preservation. One of the things we really hope will happen in the scenarios is, this is rare in any game. Every gamer is trained win, win, win. Right? My job is to win this scenario. Well, the job as a commander is also to achieve the mission. But a good commander, even if they're not a nice guy trying to preserve the men, might think, I should not continue this fight because I need to have my company live to fight another day. So this happens in our campaign. So the Rocotten Bailers cleared a hill in, I think it's Italy, and they get to the top of the hill. And it's great, except there's one problem. Here's coming a battalion of Germans, and you're only company. So this is really not a good fight to have. So maybe this is the time to withdraw. On the other hand, you've got some other Americans that are off to your left that you will leave exposed to be flanked if you retreat. So what's the right call here? Hopefully that it's not obvious what the right call is. I mean, probably you should stay, but sometimes maybe it is right to go. Maybe you tell the other guys we got to get out of here too. So the point is, you should be thinking about force preservation, not just for moral reasons or emotional reasons, but sometimes it might be the best military decision. And the vets early on taught me to say, Luke, you never retreat, you withdraw. So we teach the player to withdraw, we hope. And we use some mechanics around how we hope to reward them to make that work.
What is your biggest challenges in designing the game so far?
Well, I gave you the first one. Spoiler is, what the hell is leadership, right? So we had to define what that was. And it took a long time, a lot of thinking, a lot of reading. What's it mean spiritually? What does it mean tactically? And I don't claim I have the answers. I do hope that we've started the conversation with the player for themselves. So that's number one. Well, it's always these soft things. What does respect mean? Which attributes are you going to pick, right? I mean, for instance, should I model battlefield fatigue? Obviously, fatigue is very important. It comes up a lot in battles, but that's yet one more attribute to model. So I made the decision, we got to keep it relatively simple. One of our goals is to reach a larger audience, not just the grognards, the people who are students of war. We want the people who watch Band of Brothers to be able to connect to this game. So we give them 18 factors, however realistic, to manage. We're not going to keep them. So fatigue is abstracted. Fatigue will be probably every unit starts with some essentially stress or suppression to model the effect of the fatigue, which is not too off base. I think there's always a struggle between a good game and an interesting experience and simulation. Again, I'm not pretending this is the battlefield simulator. And maybe there's places to go with your audience at some point where we focus more on that. And it's not so entertaining, but it's more credible. But we hope it has a decent level of credibility, or at least pushes the envelope forward. But I'll give you an example of that. So, no command, as I understand it, it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of autonomy. In other words, you're the captain, you give the orders, and lieutenants go do the best they can, and you're not micromanaging them. So one way we could have done Band of Brothers is, Burden of Command, is we could have said, well, okay, give the lieutenant the order and let the AI try to run the lieutenant. Much more credible. First, the AI would probably be horribly inadequate and do things that, no sane lieutenant would do. Then maybe it might not run across the open. So first, it would have been hard to do well and piss people off legitimately. Secondly, let me go back to psychology. So I keep a little picture here I can't show you right now, but it's a baby on its back, and it's got a mobile over it. And so I say a lot of like child psychology, and babies are another sort of example of things that don't have people that don't have language yet. So you can see in some ways things more clearly. So they love mobiles because it's control. They can control and influence the environment. I alluded to earlier to animal models of stress and so forth. So there's something they've been known, I think, since the 70s or 80s called learned helplessness. So let me digress for a moment. Yeah. Well, you know that, but just in case some of the audience don't. So you take rats, you put them there. I'll get this roughly right, I think. And some of the rats, there's something they can do. They can swim to a little platform and save themselves. Other rats, there's nothing they can do to save themselves. They can paddle, but they're going to sort of sink beneath the waves eventually. So you take the two groups, the groups that learn, if I get over, I do things, I can save myself. The other group can't really. And where I think they do it is shocks. Now, here's the interesting part. You take the ones who have learned that they can't influence the environment, they can't change things, and you give them a platform. So you throw them in the water, you put a platform out where they can get to the platform and drag themselves out. And the learned helplessness, just sit there and drown. I hope they pulled them out. Sadistic experimenters. I think they did. But the point is, they were clearly not going to go to the platform. So that's sort of a model of, depression. Maybe probably not stress, depression. So my point here is gamers, being humans, like to be in control. So might make a very credible simulation. But if you gave a few orders and then sat there and watched them do things for the rest of the game, I don't think it'd be a very successful game. Maybe there's some games try to do some of this, but it's really rolling the dice and hard to do. So I made the decision that you are in charge of all the units. Typically, you're running the lieutenants, you're running the squads. But sometimes they may disobey your orders. I gave examples. Sometimes you may order them across the open, and they say, "Yeah, you first, Lieutenant." So I try to keep those to key moments. Assaults, moving across the open. There's a series of about 5 or 6 based on the book like Brains and Behavior that I believe are central moments when orders may be either disobeyed or given lip service. Oh, yes, sir. We'll go out there and attack the enemy. And then, strangely enough, they fall down 10 feet out and crawl forward because, sorry, sir, the fire's too hard because they're sane. Right. And you gave them a stupid command. So, autonomy. I'll give you one more fun game one, and then I'll give you something you can laugh at me. Okay. So game one, here's an interesting example. Early on, I was trying to figure out command, and one of the aspects of command is that leaders have command points to make things happen, right? In a limited quantity. So the captain, I had a sort of straightforward model. Every time the lieutenant did something, the captain had to pay for it, right? The modeling is the captain's talking to the lieutenant, briefing him sort of on the battlefield. Yeah, I agree, go do that or whatever, or he's giving him support, whatever you want to imagine it as. And it costs the captain for the lieutenant to activate. So unfortunately, it's led to a really boring game. So what happened is every time I'd order lieutenant, Captain Hughes, Hughes my last name, pays a point, right? Well, then the captain just turned into a bucket of command command points. He always sat in a corner because the best thing he could do was pay for lieutenants to do things. Maybe some truth to that, dull. So, and you're no autonomy, right? There's no control. Remember I talked about that desire for control. So I changed it. So now you don't charge the captain for lieutenants to do things. The captain's kind of a free agent. He gets to move around the battlefield where he thinks the key points are and provide his support. So essentially extra command points. It's kind of the chess queen in some sense. He can come up and make a difference, and hopefully we make him better at various morale points. The captain's here to give me support. This is a big moment. I'll try harder. So the good news is a lot of vets say there's something to that. In some sense, the captain's job is to be at the hot points, lending his weight and support. So that's one interesting sort of game design where the gameplay drove me to make a design differently. Last one here is, you can laugh at me because this is egregiously self-serving, but it is true, which is the other challenge is to be successful as an indie game. So this is where you turn me off as I start my ad, but honestly, there's something to say here. So when I started this game, which is something like 7 to 10 years ago on my free time, and then more full-time in the last 3 or 4, indie market. Indies are little game companies like us. We have about 14 or 15 people listed on the website in practice. We're about 3 or 4 people full-time. A lot of people giving volunteer hours after work. Like, the U.S. Army major has a few things to do being a U.S. Army major, I think many of you may relate to. So we're small. And the rate of little games now on the market is something like 4,000 or 5,000 a month, something crazy. So the biggest problem now is not to generate a good game. That's pretty challenging, but to get any attention. So something like you've done for me today is critical to our success. And so I'm obviously saying my self-interest, but truthfully, this is key. If you want us to do future campaigns, I know you have a question about that, so maybe we'll move to that next. And you like what we're trying to do, please, spread the word or give us advice or, keep an eye on us because we'd like to learn. We'd like to do better. I will commit to this, by the way. Now, this is where I fail my sales pitch. I promise you we will fail to deliver on burden of command because it's a pretty tall order. I do promise you, though, that we will try to open the door and start these conversations, and we will not do it adequately. But I hope we're doing things people haven't done. And really, we need your support to pull it off. I do not have Spielberg. You may have noticed Spielberg is not behind me supporting. Spielberg, where are you? Does anybody know Spielberg, please? Give him a call with your... I'll accept Tom Hanks also.
So this rolls into the next question, and I appreciate the thought that whatever you're releasing is so new, it's not going to be perfect. And
see how I'm covering my ass? Yes, go ahead.
I would say you fail your way to success, so maybe the first couple of attempts are going to be horrible, but we'll get enough feedback from the audience that we can make it good.
Excellent. That is so. I deeply believe in learning from failure. Actually, that's one of the things my professor said to me early on. He said, hey, Roger Schenck, he's a very famous AI professor. He said he wasn't easy on me, but it was good for me. He said, look, to all of us, he said, what do you learn from success? I mean, there's nothing to learn, right? Because you're successful. So when do you learn? You learn from failure. So, and I think good leaders learn from failure. So I think I must be a really good leader then, given my rate of failure.
So with that, once you have kind of burden of command complete and released, do you think it would be easy to modify? I shouldn't use the word easy. How difficult do you think it would be to modify it, to put it in kind of different wars, different theaters, and then account for the more complexity of the modern battlefield?
That's an excellent question. So first, let me talk about what I think we can do in sort of the modding situation and so forth. And I do hope, by the way, that I'll get to work with militaries eventually. When I was working for Accenture, I had some exposure working in militaries. And I know that's a slow process. So that's not something I want to tie the early success of the company to, but I would like to try to do that eventually. And, we could deliver different kinds of messages, a little bit more methodology messages about here are the 4 things you reach by a doctrine you should do, which is a legitimate way to teach. So anyway, here's where I think, let me talk about the tools. So the gist of it is there's a tool to put together the battles in the sense of, you can very quickly actually using some third-party tools, put maps together using our kind of tile set, put the units on a map, You lay out the organizations. We do enforce organizations. Lieutenant Dearborn's in charge of first platoon, etc. You can't just order random people. The captain's in charge of this company. We make it, I think, pretty intuitive, but we do enforce that. Most games don't. You lay all that out, and you decide, fog of war, who's hidden or not. And you kind of got a battle. And once we have an AI, we don't have an AI yet. We have everything I described up to that to now. We have a little bit of AI. That's what I'll be working on in the fall. And that's my background. So therefore, I'm certain to fail. That's pretty quick. I mean, you can put the battle together pretty fast. Of course, you want to get it right. What units were there, so forth. Then you want to attach the narrative to it. This is very important, unusual, to choose your own adventure. So we use a tool from a company called Inkle. They generously provide a free middleware tool called Ink, which is basically writers write interactive fiction, so it's not for programmers. So basically, you sit there and say, basically, remember the choose your own moments, like, hey, the sniper hit the guy, are you going to step out? So basically, you sit down and you write that text. Then you say, a little special symbol, here's choice 1, here's a little symbol, here's choice 2. And then if you click this choice, go to this description, and it's a wonderful language for writers, for non-technical but very creative people, to write choose your own adventures. What I did, was integrate that into burden of command. So as a writer, Alan and Paul are writers who have their own background, successful history, and choose your own adventure fiction. Go look at their games. See Alan and Paul, I gave you a plug. Look them up on Steam. They can say, okay, if you pick that one, do 3 suppression to the squad. They can say, causes casualty. They can also do things like, only if an American unit goes to hex 3-3, or if American leader Dearborn sees a German anywhere in this area, etc., or a unit fails a morale check around assault, then pop this narrative moment or this interactive decision. So that's sort of the extra. But again, I worked pretty hard with them, and they're writers, they're not coders. We have called burden of command script, right? So it's basically ink, this very friendly language, tied into the engine. So now that is not trivial to learn, but you're not coding. So that's how so the narrative side, I think you could do in any war. I mean, really, because it's choose your own adventure, right? But having the right tactical battlefield, that's a different question. So let me talk about that. Definitely can extend the engine pretty trivially back into the 1930s. I think it'd be pretty interesting to go look at Spanish Civil War, for example. And both tactically, because they're defining blitzkrieg and so forth, but on the Republic side, this crazy Lincoln Brigade of all these foreign volunteers. A lot of narratively interesting stuff going on with that one. Probably back as far as World War I, the engine would hold up. I don't think we'd have to modify a lot to make it unpleasant. Just remove the things that made it World War II, like don't give them any armor, obviously, until a certain period. So World War I could probably be handled. Going forward, I think Korean War, pretty coverable. One guy who's a military historian, I won't name him so he's not put on point, but he worked for one of the military history centers. He believes it could go fairly easily into the Vietnam War, because obviously you got to do the things like helicopters and so forth, but if you're focusing on small unit engagements, a lot of it's still the same principles. His belief is, and I'd love to hear any of your audience come to Twitter or our website and send me an email, their opinions. He believes that it would start to break down in a sort of World War II model in the 80s when the GPS and so forth starts to come in. So that's probably right. I haven't thought hard about that. It may still bear on things like insurgency situations. That's tricky emotionally because you're getting into people's current lives. But certainly the narrative would support that. Fog of war would support that. But I haven't thought hard about that. The safe zone for this engine is World War II spreading out, the different theaters in World War II, Pacific. The Japanese morale would be interesting to model. Into the Pacific, into other nations. We'll definitely explore other nations. We'll get ourselves in a lot of trouble by looking at what it's like to be inside a fascist regime or totalitarian regime like the Soviets or the Germans, because there's burden of command. What's your moral responsibility as a German captain late war? You're already probably figuring out you're going to lose this war. the war is lost, and you may be figuring out you're not on maybe the right side. And so, what's your responsibility to the men and morally, given you're on this, regime, fighting for this regime, and tricky stuff. We'll get a lot of historians involved to advise us because, man, we can do that so wrong in so many ways. In fact, if we do it right, probably people from the left and right both will hate us. Without probably be a good side. But we'll go into those dangerous territories eventually inside World War II because they're really interesting from a burden of command. Plus, I'm fascinated by the military history aspects of that. You had a commissar looking over your shoulder as a company commander. So easily in various theaters of World War II, we can push those out pretty fast. I think third parties could do it pretty easily. Doing it right is harder. You can throw fiction out there. Writing good fiction is challenging, right? Making good decisions and making it balanced. But the engine will support it. It'll be a little rough. And we are intending it for modders. I'm really keen to have people do things that I've never thought of. And I've already had wonderful suggestions for obscure campaigns I never heard of until it was pointed out to me. Like one of our writers really wants to do something on Chinese Civil War. It's very interesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I don't know much about that. So yeah, I think that's the answer. What kind of campaigns make sense and how friendly the tools are not. I mean, they're rough right now, but they're friendly.
Well, I'll give you a homework assignment. You'll need to go read General Charles Krulak's 3-Block War series, and I'll send you the article.
Send it to me later, and I will put it on my list of shame, which is
it's all of 7 pages long, but it would give a kind of the scope of modern war, and it'd be interesting if you ever wanted to get more advanced, kind of the other areas that you'd have to account for.
I have read some first-person accounts of modern, warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we do have some vets there, that I'll draw on. In fact, Rob Mathis, who was a U.S. Army captain in Iraq, it's on Twitter. He's a great guy, exploit ruthlessly because he's such a great guy. He is also a novelist. Rob, man, you really owe me. I want a percentage of the sales now. He's a novelist as well as former U.S. Army captain. He was actually an armor captain, but also led infantry. So he has pretty broad experience. So, we'll have some people who can really, we have a guy who was a Marine Master Sergeant in Afghanistan. So I'll listen very carefully to his opinions. Do whatever he says, probably. So forth. So I'd love to get in. And John McManus, our historian, has, I think he's brought his modern, yes, I know he has, like his grunts and so forth, and his history of cotton balers into the modern. So I'd like to go there eventually, but I'd go there with great trepidation because of people's lives that are currently involved in their families and so forth. So we'll go there when we're very experienced and we'll tread very carefully. And if people want us to, right, I feel very respectful of that topic. So if people, sufficient percentage think it would be a good thing to do, then we'll try to.
So for the audience, could you tell us where to find you on social media?
Well, thank you for that question. I run our Twitter account, which is @Burden of Command, capital letters, should come right away. And I do all the tweets, and I try to respond to everybody. And I love the community. This is a plug for the community now more than me, but there are quite a few vets there, quite a few writers, artists, obviously gamers, game designers. We have some, we have like a writer, Chris Avalon, who's very famous in the game industry, who we were lucky enough to have advise us early on. You can go to our website, Burden of Command, the various development blogs on the writing side, on the narrative, on the psychological, on the team. I encourage you to look at the team because they intimidate me. And we have musicians. We have a great guy who's our audio director, Chris, and he's helping us. So yeah, so it's a fun community, I think, and I try to highlight various people like you in the community. I suckered you into being part of the community, so it's fun. One of the best parts of this project, non-BS, really. One of the best parts of this project, people I get to meet, getting the privilege, not BSing from really the privilege to have this conversation with you and the audience is a privilege. I really do respect this audience. I remind you of my family connections. And then just meeting people of all these different stripes and what they bring to bear and the campaigns they tell me about or the artistic insights they give me. Last thing, for example, we have a Polish patriot, Mariusz, who did a lot of the Total War art. He's doing our portraits. we probably can't really afford to pay him quite the way he deserves, but he believes in the project. And so we get these fantastic, in my opinion, portraits of people. I hope I'll do a pull it free polls campaign with him someday, because then I can milk him for all kinds of portraits. Don't tell him. And we do have a Facebook presence. I don't run that, but I remember the team does, and we put the same thing. So if you're more comfortable with Facebook, we do that. Please, you don't want to check with us every day or whatever. Just sign up for the newsletters on the website, and that will bother you only every about 2 to 3 months with updates.
Okay. Well, so I know something on Twitter today, but is there a way that we can kind of attract more attention or stimulate kind of communication other than sharing your links out in the public? But wish lists, I think, was mentioned.
Oh, yeah. So thank you for asking that. So really spreading the word is the most important thing you can do, especially into your audience. The people who are interested in this are people interested in history, people in military background, people liking tactical games and role-playing games. But your audience, we tend to have a disproportional interest in people with a military background. So spreading the word, that context is very helpful. You're not vouching for our model. You're saying we're trying to explore these topics and help us. Really, I listen. So I try. The wish list, and this is back to the business side, so it's very interesting. Steam, which is the online platform for games, probably many of you all know that, or are Steam users. They're like the God. There's some other game platforms, God for little indies or almost any game company. They control our success to some degree. I'm not saying they do anything wrong, but it's all about getting attention. For instance, a search engine. So you go to Steam and you enter tactics. They can't put every tactics game on the first page. God knows how many tactic games there are. So, but if they put Burden of Command on the tactics page, and when somebody's searching tactics on the first page, oh my gosh, things would go well for me. So when you wish list me, Pat, thank you. I'm not starting to feel slightly dirty pushing wish listing now. So, but you asked. So, it is kind of interesting the business side. When you push wish list, you're actually ultimately, it's like a vote. You're influencing the Steam's engine. And so we've been starting to get more attention because people have been wish listing us. And so now we get more eyeballs. When we get more eyeballs, then, we get more attention. And then what this means in the end is we get to do more campaigns. Now, I'm not here to make $1 million. If I'm out to make $1 million, probably should pick something else. But I am here to do more of this and also support the team. But I want to do these campaigns. This is a mission for me. I hope you've seen it's a passion. So please, you can help us and you can help the vets. And the closing remark from me, unless you have other questions, is a little story from me personally is I remember late in going through the narrative Alan had put together, working very hard and trying to convey the sort of grit and dirt and fatigue. And, the important thing is the meal hot tonight at World War II, and the fatigue. We draw from the Liberation trilogy. Atkins is just fantastic on the anecdotes. Anyway, I remember late in the war, it's 44 in our campaign, and this picture just comes up with the guys are just slogging along in the mud. And I looked at it and I thought, I know what that's like. I don't know what that's like. But, the game made me feel like I knew what it was like because it kept bringing it up. I thought, God, I feel a connection to that guy there in the mud. It was a strange feeling. I reached in some sense emotionally through the black and white picture and felt some connection to whoever that man was, there. So I hope what matters to me is I'm the son of an historian. Remember, for me spiritually, it's important to connect to the lives of the dead because we're the last people who can speak for them now. So I want to speak for the dead here to some extent.
Well, that's an amazing closing comments. I'm sure I could talk to you for hours more, and maybe we can arrange for a time when your video game finally comes out that we can kind of circle back around and see what
fantastic.
You
you can see all the inadequacies.
Plans for the future. For the audience out there, I do invite you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter for more videos on the topic of military history and self-development, and I'll leave a link up for the Storm of Steel videos.
Oh, good. Very worth your time.
Yep.
A little depressing, but worth your time.
Appreciate that. Well, and thank you, and I definitely appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, sir.